So thank you for coming today, and thank you for hanging around to listen to me. I won't be offended if you want to step out and get some lunch, but I will talk to you for about the next 20 minutes or so. And I'm going to talk to you today about basically brand and communication, and that in light of where we are with sustainability and how we can evolve our brands and our messaging to reach and engage and inspire people to take action and make change. So just as a quick introduction, so a big hello from me. I'm Louise. As Jarvis introduced, I'm part of Strategiq. We are an independent marketing agency here in London. And so we do everything around brand and marketing communications, and I head up the creative team. And with that as well, we were founded in around 2013. So we've been around for about 13 years now, and throughout that time, our founders have very much focused and invested on people and culture and purpose. And so over the last 6 months or so, we have been basically formalising that into a purpose council and starting to formalise our efforts around ESG. And I'm heading up that purpose council. So I'll be talking about that a little bit more as we go through the talk today. But a couple of quick things to note. I'm definitely not a climate expert, and I'm definitely not a sustainability consultant. My background has been in brand storytelling, and basically I love this planet, and that is why I'm heading up the Purpose Council. And also I'm obsessed with the power of words, and it's basically those two things coming together that I would love to talk to you about today. So, get into the heart of the story. So when we're developing brands, and this is what I've been doing as my background, my passion, and most of my day-to-day now, as well as looking after the creative team, is developing brands. And with that, the thing that I love to tell people is about story. Now, our brains are naturally wired for storytelling. So if we go back millennia, before there were laws and policies and written word, and before there was all of the media and everything that we've got going on these days, we were all sat around telling each other stories. It's how we shared lessons, it's how we shared challenges and prophecies, and how we took messages forward that weren't necessarily focused on, as it says down here, facts can be forgotten, unless you're one of those very lucky people who can remember all of the details and the facts and the stats. It's the stories that stay with us. It's the emotion, it's the sentiment, it's the human meaning in all of those facts and figures. What we want to do through story is actually take people from awareness, having an understanding of information and facts, but actually moving them to emotion. And when I'm working on brands and developing brand strategies, finding that balance between the rational and emotional in brand sentiment is so, so, so important. And from that emotion, that is how we can get people to act and to move towards change. The really important point, if we get into story structure, is that every story starts with tension. And when it comes to sustainability, we're in a huge place of tension right now. We've got this massively growing economy, but actually we've got this finite world and these finite resources. How do we balance those things? And we've got rising prosperity, but actually rising inequality as well. So it's those two things, these tensions. How do we resolve these? And knowledge of the problem, there's different levels of awareness of the problem and the problems that are out there. There are lots of different problems. They're all complicated. But actually, it does mean that there is uncertainty about the solution or the solutions as well. So what we need to do is go from this conflict to resolution, which is the heart of every story, basically. And the great brands and the great storytellers are the ones that can make that visible, but not just through facts and information and shouting at people. It's about how do we make it human? How do we make it relatable? How do we make it real? And so this is the point around issues can inform, but actually what we want to do is get to this place of emotion. And so it's not just our job to help people understand what the problem is, it's actually how do we help them feel it. So, we can talk about climate change, we can talk about inequality, but actually you need to anchor these into the real world problems that these are leading to. If we're talking about climate change, actually it's the story of the farmer. And what we need is stories that don't dilute the seriousness, but actually that we can spark hope and we can inspire people. It's not about doom, but equally it's not about perfection either. It's an absolute balance of these worlds. And so important is the point about collaboration. How do we resolve all of these things through optimism and collaboration through our messaging? Because we don't actually have an awareness problem. You know, a lot of people know that climate change exists. A lot of people care, but actually it's about how and where do we channel that sentiment? You know, so many people, and I'll put myself in this category until I started working on the Purpose Council recently. It's all very well and good having good intentions, and I'd be like the person at the Christmas party collecting up all the wrapping paper and stripping off all the sellotape. But actually, how do we channel that into the bigger things that are going to make the bigger difference? And sadly, this is from a couple of years ago, but you know, there is a slight feeling from people that they could make a lot of change, but actually, will it make a difference? And then that's where we need to look to the big corporates to make a difference. So we know that there is this empathy here, but actually there is that feeling of helplessness. So how can we give people something to hold on to, something to grab onto, something to take action from? And what we don't want to do is to fall into the trap of kind of doom and gloom or guilt or data dumps. And this comes back to the stories fact. You know, people are 22% more likely to remember stories than they are to remember facts. You're going to remember how that story made you feel. It's everything that we do as humans. People remember how you made them feel. And so we don't want to equally go into kind of fear, or you can't make a change, or you can't make a difference, or it's too late. It's absolutely not the case. We can make a difference. But also we don't want to go into that guilt as in you should be doing more, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. It's how do we get that message across and flip that so that people want to and can and know how to be engaged and to take action. So in terms of, I've always kept bringing this back to brand storytelling because there are so many connections between the two, but the levers between kind of behavioral change and between good brand strategy are a lot of these things. When I'm going through that brand discovery process to work out where a brand fits in the world, what it stands for, why it matters, how we can articulate that in terms of core proposition through to the core messaging, how that's going to reach all of the different target audiences. You know, that's as true as much for a B2B brand as much as it is for a sustainability organization. And ultimately, we want to get to that identity that is so authentic and ownable and defendable. And that's where we want to reach. And then what that enables is that people who connect with that, who understand that, who it resonates with, it will get to that feeling of belonging. And that's what we want with brand. Oh, no, nearly got away with it, but you didn't. Participation. We go from belonging into how people can actually participate, how that connection and that community inspires them to actually be part of that conversation, to be part of that brand narrative. And ultimately, it's then what leads into optimism. You know, how is this brand going to solve that problem, to solve that challenge? How are we going to get to that conflict, to that resolution? How is that brand answering the need and the pain points of that audience? Because actually, the audience isn't just people. It's nature, it's animals, it's the world itself. So we've got bigger audience to address through this messaging. And while I am passionate about words, this is always what I say is that, you know, it's absolutely meaningless if there's no meaningful action around it. And I'm going to use an analogy of my dog. I've got a rescue dog, and he's been through various behaviorists and lots of training. And what they were saying was, there's no point in you saying something and your body doing something different. So that congruence is so important in everyday life as much as it is in brand. If you say you're going to do something, you need to do something. If you are coming up with a brand promise or a brand proposition, but actually how you're living and breathing that through your principles and the way that your organization acts each day, is going to be such a void between what you're saying and what you're doing. So congruence, so important. So it's all about finding your brand's purpose, finding your brand's voice. In that, I'll just touch on that a second. So that's about why do you exist? Why does it matter? Why do people care? How are you solving what they need? And then going into voice. This is massively underrated in terms of how brands and businesses and people can reach their audience. If we all sounded the same and all said the same things, then nobody's going to stand out in the crowd, and that's what it is with brand. If everybody's saying the same things and doing the same things and talking in the same tone of voice, it's just not going to stand out. So that authenticity, both in proposition, needs to come through to message, needs to come through to voice. And then express your message, reach your audience, go out into the world. You know, you're not necessarily talking to absolutely everybody, but those people that you have carved out as your target audience, what do they need, how are you solving it, and how are you reaching them, and how are you connecting with them? And then you can prove your intentions through your actions. So it comes back to that congruence, saying what you're going to do, then doing what you're going to say. So find your why, and then show your audience the way forward. As I've touched on previously, you know, more people are likely to act when they believe that actually change is possible. If we're saying that there is no resolution, if there is no outcome, people aren't going to get involved. They're not going to care. They belong. It comes back to that identity, that belonging, that participation. And people need to feel that their actions matter and that they make a difference. And as we know from that report, unfortunately, there is a slight feeling of inertia. There is a feeling that actually I could do all of these things, I could make all of this effort, but actually is it going to make a tangible difference in the world, in the grand scheme of things? So we need initiatives and we need brands that actually make all of those efforts worthwhile and that they actually come to something and they make a difference and make people feel and prove to them that putting the effort in is going to be worth it in the end. So I've just got a few examples. I've got one that is not our example, but then there's two others that I just wanted to show in terms of one. I don't know if anybody else loves this as much as me do, but Tony's Chocolonely, you know, it's not about what I was saying at the beginning. This is not about saying you must do this, you must do that, or, you know, getting on a preaching about what you should or shouldn't be doing. This is about here's a broken system and let's fix it together. And by doing that, what they've done is made you, the consumer, the hero in that. It's your choice. You are the person that is choosing to buy. And what we're doing is actually empowering you to make a better decision. In terms of the wrapper and the marketing, this comes back to storytelling. It's another communication channel. It's a way that we can put real stories and connect with people, not through the traditional corporate predictable ways that we have been doing for a long time. The playfulness, you know, all of the odd packaging shapes, this is not about conforming to what's been before. If we want to achieve change and we want to be different, comes back to that showing and doing. This is about how we can do it. We're not just saying it, we're showing it in how we're delivering what we do as well. It is a serious purpose, but you can still have joy in that. You can still have playfulness. You can still have humor as well. And this all comes back to, you know, this isn't about guilt. This is about you joining a mission, you joining a community, you being part of the change. And not just because you're being told to, it's because you actively want to. And the next one that I was just going to show you, this is a client of ours, which is David Shepherd Wildlife Fund. And a couple of years ago when, you know, there was a lot emerging around AI tools in creativity, and we were looking at the plight of the pangolin. And what we wanted to do was be able to tell the story of pangolins. And we wanted to be able to do that in ways that, you know, either from cost prohibitive or logistics, purely logistics, was impossible to tell through normal traditional means. But what we did, I'm not sure if this is going to work. Do you know if I can play a video from the screen? Or not really? If not, I can just talk about it. No worries. So basically what we did, we came up with this concept called Through the Eyes Of, and it focused on the different animals. We started with the pangolin, and we showed their plight. And what we could have done was just showing the facts and stats around their endangerment and the kind of awful things that they go through day to day. But what we did is that we narrated that and visually showed that through video directly from their perspective so that they so that we could actually see first-hand perspective all of those challenges that we were covering in the facts and stats on the screen, in terms of how it feels from the animal's point of view to go through what they are going through. Unfortunately, I can't show you the video, but it is on YouTube if you would like to see it. And the other one is 4 Acres Earth, which is one of the wonderful Jarvis's great initiatives, which we are working with him on at the moment. But this is an example of brand storytelling and how we can go from having a really beautiful idea, a really clear purpose, but actually it's that empowerment point. How can we give people all around the world the opportunity to be involved with something bigger, to take all of that want and desire to do better and be better, but actually grab hold of their own 4 acres. If you split up the whole coverage of the world and allocated it to the whole population, it would be 4 acres each. And if we all did that, and if we all stepped up and took hold of 4 acres and took responsibility for it and celebrated it and showcased it and defended it and vouched for it, then what a difference we could all make. And so with this, what we started to do was look at how that story comes about. And Jarvis had so many brilliant ideas in terms of the tagline and how that story, we can condense it down into just a few words. But what we did, and unfortunately I'm not going to be able to show you the video again, but what we did here was start to work on, Sam's dipped out, but basically what we were doing was that voice, that story, that authenticity. How do we work through? I can remember the very first conversation that I had with Sam from a creative concepting point of view, and it was all about, let's not just go telling people all the facts and the stats. Let's actually get to the heart of this. Let's have a really clear voice. We even spoke about being more poetic and more creative and how we could share the story, not just through the words that we're using, but the voice that we're using as well. So here we just worked through multiple iterations of the script. And this comes back to the creative human collaboration at the heart of this as well. So this is just one of the lines on it, but somewhere on this earth are 4 acres of your own, and then it stems out into a whole poetic piece and a video which Jarvis launched in Times Square back in April. Was it only last month? On Earth Day. It was on Earth Day. But really celebrating the fact that you don't need to be there in person, you only need to be there in purpose. And that comes back to this empowerment message, wherever you are in the world, you can make a difference. And so it's taking something that is super challenging and so many problems, and it can feel like it's such a big thing that we can't get on top of. But actually, if everybody does their own bit, then we are making a change and we're doing it together. So it makes it manageable, it makes it possible. And we're doing that and we're connecting with people through how we're messaging and communicating. So a lot of organisations now are communicating less about sustainability for all sorts of reasons. But the main point that I wanted to get to is that we really just don't need perfection. We just need to be honest, we need to be authentic, and we need to be working towards that better future together. And when we're sharing stories, it's going to inspire others. So we can all be doing more through the messaging that we're sharing. But thank you so much for listening. Does anybody have any questions? I know I went through that quite quickly, and unfortunately my videos didn't work, but yes, hello.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you your last point about why a lot of organizations are not speaking about sustainability anymore. Are they focused on regeneration now, or is there an issue with sustainability?
I think it's a couple of things. I think it's a lot of different demands and a lot of priorities in terms of focus of where the business is spending their time or allocating their focus. But I think also it is fears of are we doing enough to be able to be genuinely talking on this subject and not be greenwashing or anything like that. And I think that I've certainly heard that fear in terms of, actually, are we doing enough to be able to put a statement and put a stance out there, or should we just way back? But also it does come down to competing priorities right now, and so much going on for businesses and AI and everything else that's going on. It's taking up a lot of headspace in different ways, unfortunately. So we can do more in that. Yeah. Anybody else?
Curious of how the heroic plays into the story you're telling.
How the heroic plays into
Heroic plays into the story. How
That's a really good point. And I think with that as well, what it comes down to is making the person you, the consumer, the hero of the story. And what I mean by that is that it is easy for brands and businesses to come in and try to be the hero and try to be that we've got all of the answers and we know what we're talking about and we're going to solve everything. But actually, that's all irrelevant if you've not got the consumers on your side and buying into it and being the hero that is making the change. So I think it comes back to positivity, it comes back to optimism, it comes down to action, because there's no heroic if there isn't a change, if there isn't a resolution. So I would say that that's how that can come into the brand narrative and the brand story. Make the consumer the hero in the story. Yeah. Anybody else? No? All right, well, thank you all so much for listening. I really appreciate it, and hopefully speak to you all later.